Okay, so in the series of classes that we gave about the coming of Mashiach, we were focused till now mainly about the actual coming of Mashiach. And God willing, next few classes, we're going to learn about another major principle of our faith, which is the resurrection of the dead. The Maimonides lists the resurrection of the dead as one of the 13th or the final of all 13 principles of faith. And we have to understand what's the relevance of the resurrection of the dead. Why is that considered fundamental to our faith? There is a definite promise in the Torah that there will be the resurrection of the dead. That's clear. But just because the resurrection of the dead is part of Torah doesn't mean that it's fundamental to our faith. There are a lot of things the Torah says, but it's not that if you deny something the Torah says, of course, that's heretical. Believing that something the Torah isn't true is heretical. But this is not just believing that the truth of Torah. This is about the belief in a specific thing, and this specific thing is fundamental to our faith. And the question is, why is the resurrection of the dead, why is it fundamental to being Jewish? Why is it fundamental to the Torah mitzvahs? Let's look at another principle of faith, for example. There is a principle of faith that the Torah is eternal. The Torah comes from heaven. You can understand that the Torah coming from Hashem, believing the Torah comes from Hashem, that's a major principle of faith, because without acknowledging the Torah comes from Hashem, so then why should I keep the Torah? So believing in the Torah coming from heaven, that is fundamental to our faith. But why is it fundamental to our faith to believe in the resurrection of the dead? Why is that specifically, how does that affect the way we perform Torah mitzvahs? And we need to learn about that, understand it, and relate to it um, in order to fully perform all of Torah mitzvahs. There is a line in Maimonides, a very powerful line about belief in the coming of Mashiach. Maimonides says, anyone who doesn't believe in him or doesn't await his coming, not only does he deny all other prophets, he denies the Torah and Moshe Rabbeinu, he denies the Torah and Moses himself. So Maimonides doesn't just say if you don't believe in the coming of Mashiach. Maimonides says if you don't wait for the coming of Mashiach. In other words, in believing in the coming of Mashiach itself, there is believing the coming of Mashiach in a way that it makes you pray for it, that you believe in it and you're connected to it, and you want it and you daven for it. And Maimonides says that the belief in coming Mashiach has to be so much a part of us that we daven for it, that we want it. I heard a great someone's at the door. Rabbi Yosef, oh, they got it. Hold on a second. Okay, so not only is believing in the coming of Mashiach fundamental to our faith, but if to believe in coming of Mashiach in a way that we are so in touch with what it is that it stimulates us to pray for it. I heard a great Hasidic teaching about the phrase in the Talmud about the month of Adar. Is when Adar comes in, you have to increase in joy. So the question is, why does it say when Adar comes in? And the answer is that it's not sufficient to just be around in the month of Adar. You have to let Adar come into you. And in Yiddish, the word Adar is related to the word veins, the Adarin. The Adarin are the veins. So that means not only do we have to let the joy of Adar be absorbed within us, but it has to be absorbed within us in a way that it touches our kishkas, our intestines, our veins, our body. That's the meaning of the Talmud. When Adar enters, increase in joy. If you let Adar become part of you, the theme of Adar is how Hashem lifts us up and blesses us beyond what we deserve. And seeing Hashem's closeness in this month gives a Jew, the Rebbe says, the greatest joy. In a similar way, when we talk about the belief in the coming of Mashiach, Maimonides says that it's not sufficient just to believe it's going to happen. If you just believe it's going to happen, but you don't daven for it, you're not davening for it, that means that you don't really believe in it. And not only do you not believe in it, the Maimonides says you're considered a heretic of the whole entire Torah. So there's two parts to this. One part of this is that the more you know about the coming of Mashiach, the more you want it. You have to learn about the coming of Mashiach and learn about all the details of the coming of Mashiach. Because without knowing what something is, then why would you want it? You have to know what it is, and by knowing what it is, that will stimulate the yearning for the coming of Mashiach. And conversely, when you uh so the more you know what it is, the more you'll want it. Also, conversely, that the more you want it, the more you're expecting it, the more you want to learn about what it is. The more you're expecting coming Mashiach, the more that's on your mind, the more you're interested to know what's going on and what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. That's why it's important to not just to learn to believe in general, but to know the details of what it is. And although Mambani says that there are certain details that are not relevant to our faith, the language Mambani is le'mivin, le'ava, le'yira, they will bring to love or reverence for Hashem. There are details which aren't significant, but there is definitely something significant about this, and that's why it's considered one of the principles of our faith. So let's understand a little bit more about the whole idea of the resurrection of the dead. When a soul leaves the world and enters Gan Eden and enters heaven, the soul experiences a bliss that we are unable of fathoming. As Maimonides says, just like a blind man cannot know what colors are, and a deaf man cannot know what sound is like, so too can we not know the pleasure of heaven. We have no sense to know the pleasure of heaven. We don't have anything in us that could relate to the unique pleasure that the souls experience in heaven. That's just when the souls arrive in Gan Eden. But every time the souls daven, every prayer, the souls ascend to a higher level. So we have souls that have been in heaven for over 3,000 years, like the souls of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And these souls are consistently being elevated level after level, higher and higher with each prayer. So when Abraham arrived in heaven, we can understand that he received a huge reward. And yet, whatever reward he received is insignificant compared to where he is now, because he's been going higher and higher and higher for 3,000 years, every day, 3 times a day. Besides that, it says on the yard site, on the day of the passing of a tzaddik, or the day of the passing of every Jew, the soul has an incomparable, it's a quantum leap, a major leap to where it was before. That's what happens in the soul, to a soul on a yard site. So here we have souls who have ascended so high, and consistently going higher and higher. And yet, when Mashiach comes, it says that these souls, they will they'll return to physical bodies. And the question is, why? Why is it necessary for a soul to receive a reward from Hashem, the reward of godly revelation? Why is it necessary for that godly revelation to be experienced by a soul inside a body? You'd think that to experience godly revelation, the less you have to do with the physical, the better. Because we're talking about, as Maimonides says, a blind man cannot see colors, a deaf man cannot understand sound. Our body doesn't have any sense to appreciate the bliss of Gan Eden. And yet there'll be a godly revelation that's beyond Gan Eden. And where will that revelation be? In the physical body. And so when souls return to bodies. So we need to understand, why is it when Mashiach will come, will all souls come alive again? Why don't we say to stay in heaven? We also need to understand something else. There is another principle of faith about reward and punishment. Torah says that when you do Torah mitzvahs, you're rewarded of God, but you don't do it, then there's a punishment. So there's already a principle in the Talmud that you should not be like servants who serve their master, who are doing this because they want to get a reward. You should be like servants who serve their master without consideration of a reward, because they're not thinking about the reward. So if the Torah was addressing people who are on a lower level, and Torah is telling them, hey, you have to know there's a reward for Torah mitzvahs, because otherwise you might not want to do it. Okay. You can understand why it's so important to know about reward. But what about people on a higher level What about the Torah is addressing? The Torah is saying these principles of faith are relevant to everybody. The 13 principles of faith are for every Jew, even tzaddikim, even the most righteous. So why is reward and punishment relevant? And the answer is that part of believing in Torah mitzvahs is believing in the impact of Torah mitzvahs. And believing that the Torah mitzvahs we do has a spiritual value, and that will give the soul bliss in the world to come. And the Torah mitzvahs we do also has a physical impact in the physical world that will be revealed. Mashiach will come. We'll see the godly light in every mitzvah in the resurrection of the dead in the physical world. So part of our faith in Hashem, part of our faith in Judaism, part of being Jewish means not just believing in Hashem and Torah mitzvahs, but believing also in the impact of Torah mitzvahs. And believing in not just in one reward, but in the two parts of the reward, in the resurrection of the dead, and in the coming of Mashiach, and in Gan Eden. Believing in heaven, there's a reward for souls in heaven, and also believing in the resurrection of the dead. The question though is that why is that so important to our Jewishness? I just want to mention another thing about awaiting Mashiach's coming before we go further. About this idea of waiting for the coming Mashiach, it's worthwhile to mention the teaching of Reb David Kimchi at the end of Shmuel Aleph. And the Shmuel Aleph talks about the death of many of the soldiers of David HaMelech, of King David. The Talmud says that the reason they died is because they didn't pray for the temple. They didn't want the temple. They didn't want to have the temple. The temple wasn't built yet, but they didn't pray to have the temple. That's why they died. And actually, the language of the Talmud is they weren't teveya. They didn't demand that God bring the temple. Rabbi David Kimchi concludes, quoting from another passage of the Talmud, this is for the soldiers of King David who never saw a temple. So for us, so we have had a first temple and a second temple, and therefore we're aware of what it is. How much more so is it necessary for us to not just believe in coming Mashiach, believe in the resurrection of the dead, but to daven for it, to pray for it. And the truth is, as a friend of mine put it, we're anyways asking for Mashiach. In our prayers, we ask for Mashiach all the time. So why don't you stop for a second and think of what you're asking? You're anyways saying the words. You're asking for Hashem all good things. You believe Hashem is going to make a difference in your life. So you believe that your prayer is doing something. You're talking to Hashem. So why not stop and ask Hashem when you're asking for Hashem anyways to bring Mashiach? Why not actually ask for it? You're already asking. Why not ask for it? As I mentioned also last Friday, the Chidah says in our prayers we say, "Bring Mashiach, es semach David avdach hameis etzmiach." May you hasten the sprouting and growth and the flourishing of David, your servant of Mashiach. And we say, why should you do this, Hashem? Because for your salvation we hope for all day. So the Chidah brings from the Sefer called Tzemach David that what's the why? Bring Mashiach because we're waiting for it. Just even though we're not so righteous, even though we're not the greatest people, just because we're waiting for Mashiach, that's already sufficient for us to deserve the coming Mashiach. So in order to bring out that yearning, that's why it's necessary for us to learn about what the resurrection of that is, what the coming Mashiach is, and to bring us to have this principle of faith be part of it. So in short, we asked today, why is it fundamental to our Jewishness? We also asked today, why is it that the resurrection of the dead is specifically a spiritual reward for souls in bodies? Why do souls have to leave heaven to come here? It would seem that to get a spiritual reward, you need to be without a body. So God will get to these questions, Mr. Hashem, next class. But I just want to mention one more point about this. A similar question could be asked about the soul's descent to a body. In our prayers, we say, the soul you gave to me is pure. You created it, you formed it, and you blew it within me. And the question is, why does it say it's pure and then say you created it? How could it be pure before it's created? And the answer is that the soul, as it is pure, refers to the soul in the world of Atzilus, where it's not yet an entity. It's not yet an entity called the soul. It doesn't know of anything other than godliness. It's not a creation yet. It's part of the Creator. That's in the highest world. Then there is the way the soul descends to have a spiritual entity as creation in the world of Bria. And then it descends further to be to go into physical body. But there's there's one descent of the soul becoming a thing, and there's another descent of the soul becoming a physical in a physical body. So it says about this descent, Chassidus asks the question, why did Hashem deem it fit that the soul should leave heaven to go down to the physical body? And Chassidus answered that specifically through this descent, the soul reaches a higher level. So that descent of the soul to a physical body to reach a higher level, that we can understand. This Chassidus gives the analogy of water flowing into a dam. And the dam is stopping the water, but the dam also causes the water's pressure to intensify until the water overwhelms the dam and it knocks down the dam. In a similar way, the soul coming to a physical body has to encounter all kinds of challenges which reveal deeper parts of the soul. Okay, that's about how the physical body reveals something more of the soul. The resurrection of the dead is something else. That the reward for keeping Torah mitzvahs is specifically by being a soul in a body. Now we have to understand, why would you need a body to experience a spiritual reward when it's something that we can't even imagine with our physical senses? The eyes cannot. A blind man's eyes cannot imagine color, and a deaf man's ears can't imagine sound. We can't imagine the spiritual bliss of heaven, and yet they leave heaven to come here to get a higher reward. You need to understand that and why this is considered a major principle of our faith. Mr. Shem, we'll get to that in the next